My father's final will revealed my wife is my long-lost half-sister. I swear to God, that's the title they'll give this whole mess if it ever gets out. And you know what? It probably will. People can't get enough of this kind of garbage, right? So before you click away, do me a favor. If you're getting anything out of this, and I hope you are for whatever twisted reason, hit that subscribe button. And if you feel it, a like goes a long way. Share it around too. Let me know what you think in the comments. Seriously, I need to know if I'm completely losing my mind here or if someone else out there gets it. It all started a few months ago, just like any other Tuesday. Wake up, coffee, kiss Sarah goodbye as she heads out for her early yoga class, then off to the office. I'm in real estate development, you know? Building things, making something out of nothing. It's a good life. Or at least it was. Sarah? She's everything. That's the sick joke, isn't it? She's the sun, the moon, the whole damn universe. We met at a fundraiser, actually. She was volunteering, looking impossibly elegant in some simple black dress, a shy smile playing on her lips when I stumbled over my words trying to impress her. I was hooked. Hooked and reeled in faster than I'd ever thought possible. 5 years we've been married. 5 years of absolute bliss. Or so I thought. We bought this place out in the suburbs, a decent colonial with a porch swing and a yard big enough for a dog, though we never got around to that. It was our sanctuary, our picket fence dream. I'd come home, she'd have dinner ready, we'd watch some dumb show, fall asleep in each other's arms. Perfect. Too perfect, maybe. My dad, on the other hand, was a different story. A classic old school guy. Built his own business from the ground up, a bit gruff, not one for sentimentality. We had a good relationship, I guess, but it wasn't deep. He'd call once a week, ask about work, about Sarah, tell me to keep the lawn mowed. Standard dad stuff. He lived alone in the same sprawling ranch house he'd had since I was a kid, out in Arizona. He'd retired years ago and seemed content with his golf and his endless desert views. Then, out of the blue, he gets sick. Fast. Cancer. They caught it late, of course. He hated doctors, hated fuss. Always said he'd go on his own terms. Guess he got his wish, in a way. The funeral was a small affair. Just me, Sarah, his lawyer, and a couple of his old golf buddies. He'd been pretty clear in his instructions. No big ceremony. Just done. Afterward, the lawyer, a stoic guy named Mr. Henderson, said he needed to go over the will. Standard procedure, I figured. Maybe a few sentimental trinkets for me, the house, some investments. I just wanted to get back to Sarah, to the quiet grief of our own space. We sat in Henderson's sterile wood-paneled office. The air was thick with that stale, recycled office smell. Sarah sat beside me, her hand a warm, comforting weight on my thigh. I squeezed it, grateful for her presence. Henderson cleared his throat, his voice dry as parchment. He read through the legal jargon, the disclaimers, the distribution of assets. It was all as expected, the house, the stocks, the bonds. Then he got to the part about a specific trust, set up for my mother. She passed when I was young, a vague memory of a gentle smile and a song. I never knew much about her. My dad rarely talked about her. He remarried briefly when I was a teenager, a woman I barely remember, and that marriage dissolved before it ever really started. He'd been alone ever since. Henderson paused, adjusted his glasses. And finally, he said, his voice taking on a slightly more measured tone, there is a codicil, a supplementary addition to the will, executed shortly before your father's passing. He tapped a folder with his pen. This pertains to a pre-existing life insurance policy and its beneficiaries. I nodded, waiting. My father had always been a planner. He liked things neat and tidy. Henderson continued, his eyes fixed on the document. Mr. Robert Hayes, your father, named a beneficiary on this policy, in addition to yourself. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. The beneficiary is listed as Sarah Elizabeth Miller. My brow furrowed. Sarah? You mean my wife, Sarah? Henderson gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. No, the policy name's Sarah Elizabeth Miller. My stomach gave a little lurch. Sarah's maiden name was Miller. Sarah Elizabeth Miller. My Sarah? But why? Why wouldn't he just say my wife? Why the maiden name? Was this some kind of legal formality? I don't understand, I said, my voice a little tight. That's my wife, Sarah Hayes. Her maiden name is Miller. Henderson opened the folder, pulling out a different document, a copy of an old birth certificate. He slid it across the desk. This is the birth certificate of Sarah Elizabeth Miller, born to Eleanor Vance. My eyes scanned the document. The name Eleanor Vance meant nothing to me. Then I looked at the father's name. My breath hitched. The father's name was listed as
Robert Hayes. My father. A cold wave washed over me. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with a concerned expression. Her hand had gone still on my thigh. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Henderson leaned back, his gaze steady. "It appears, Mr. Hayes, that your father had another daughter. A daughter you were not aware of. A daughter named Sarah Elizabeth Miller. And you, Mr. Hayes, are her half-brother." The world tilted. The sterile office swam before my eyes. Half-brother? Sarah? No. That was impossible. My Sarah? The woman I loved? The woman I married? The woman who slept beside me every night? My father's daughter? I looked at Sarah again. She was pale, her eyes wide with confusion, then a dawning horror that mirrored my own. She hadn't known. I could see it. She was as blindsided as I was. This can't be right," I choked out, my voice cracking. "My dad, he never said anything. He never mentioned anyone else." Henderson's face was grave. "Your father was a private man, Mr. Hayes, especially about his personal life. He confirmed the authenticity of this document and his paternity with his dying breath, according to his physician. He wanted to ensure that his other daughter and her inheritance were provided for. It seems he intended to tell you himself, but time ran out." My mind raced, a frantic, chaotic mess. Eleanor Vance. Who was she? My father had been married to my mother when I was born. He'd remarried later to a woman I barely remember. This Sarah Elizabeth Miller? When was she born? I looked back at the birth certificate. The date? It was 2 years after my own birth. 2 years. So, this wasn't some child from a previous marriage. This was a betrayal. A secret. A decades-long secret. I looked at Sarah. Her face was a mask of shock. Her lower lip trembled slightly. "Robert, I don't understand," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "You don't understand?" I repeated, my voice rising, raw with disbelief and a creeping, poisonous anger. "You don't understand that your father apparently had an affair? That he had another daughter? And you never knew?" "How could I know?" she shot back, a flicker of her own bewilderment turning to a defensive edge. "My mother, she never said a word. She was a very private person too."
My mind was a whirlwind of impossible scenarios. My father, the man I thought I knew, living a double life? And Sarah Elizabeth Miller. The name felt alien, yet so familiar. It was her name, her maiden name. Was this a coincidence? A sick, twisted twist of fate? "Your mother's name was Eleanor Vance?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Sarah's eyes widened further. She shook her head, a frantic, almost desperate movement. "No, my mother's name was Mary Miller." The floor dropped out from under me. Mary Miller, not Eleanor Vance. So, if Eleanor Vance was Sarah's mother and Robert Hayes was Sarah's father, then Sarah Elizabeth Miller was my father's daughter. But Sarah, my wife, wasn't Sarah Elizabeth Miller, was she? "But you're Sarah Elizabeth Miller," I said, my gaze locking with hers. "Your maiden name, that's what Henderson said, Sarah Elizabeth Miller." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's my name, Sarah Elizabeth Miller. But my father died when I was a baby. My mother never talked about him, not ever. She said he was gone, just gone." The pieces started to snap together with a sickening finality. My father, Robert Hayes, Sarah's mother, Mary Miller, and Sarah Elizabeth Miller, the Sarah Elizabeth Miller in the will, and Sarah, my wife, Sarah Elizabeth Miller. "My father's name was Robert Hayes," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Sarah's face contorted, a mixture of pain and dawning, horrifying realization. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. No. That's That's not possible. Henderson cleared his throat again, his presence a dull thud in the deafening silence. The birth certificate I presented, he said softly, was that of Sarah Elizabeth Miller, born to Eleanor Vance. The beneficiary in the insurance policy is Sarah Elizabeth Miller. Mr. Hayes, your wife's full name is Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, and her maiden name is Miller. The Sarah Elizabeth Miller your father named is the same person. I stared at him, then at Sarah. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth and light, were now filled with a terrible, profound confusion. She looked at me, her gaze searching, pleading. "Robert," she whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. This is a mistake. It has to be." But it wasn't a mistake. The pieces, however impossible, however horrifying, were fitting together. My father, the stoic, quiet man, had a secret, a massive, life-altering secret. He had another daughter, my half-sister, and that half-sister was my wife. My mind reeled. Every memory, every shared laugh, every kiss, every embrace, it all curdled, twisted into something grotesque. The love I felt for her, the profound connection, was it wrong? Was it incestuous? The thought made me physically ill. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the polished wood floor. My hands were shaking, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I need air, I choked out, my voice hoarse. I walked towards the door, my legs unsteady. Sarah stood up too, her face a pale, terrified mask. "Robert, wait!" she cried out, reaching for me. I flinched away, the involuntary recoil more painful than any physical blow. I saw the hurt flash in her eyes, the confusion, the fear, and beneath it all, something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. I pushed open the office door and stumbled out into the hallway, leaving Sarah and Henderson behind, trapped in the wreckage of my father's final testament. The sterile office, the polite lawyer, the legal documents, they all felt like they belonged to another world. A world I no longer understood. A world where the woman I loved, the woman I'd built my life with, was suddenly a stranger. My sister. I lean against the cool wall, trying to breathe. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed too bright, too harsh. My father, Sarah, my wife, my half-sister. The words echoed in my head, a maddening, inescapable loop. How could this be? How could he have kept this from me? How could she have kept this from me? Did she know all along? Was this a cruel joke, a deliberate deception? The possibilities swam before my eyes, each one more devastating than the last. I felt a knot of guilt and betrayal tighten in my chest, and a deep, chilling fear of what this meant. For us, for everything. I looked back at the office door, the barrier between my old life and this new, terrifying reality. I didn't know if I could ever go back through it. The world outside the office, the bustling city street, felt alien and distant. I needed to get away. I needed space. I got into my car, my hands still trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The familiar leather of the steering wheel felt foreign under my touch. I started the engine, the sound a dull roar in the sudden quiet. I drove, not knowing where I was going, just needing to put distance between myself and that room, that revelation. The suburbs, our sanctuary, felt tainted now. The colonial house with the porch swing, the yard big enough for a dog. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed facade built on a foundation of deceit. I ended up on a long stretch of highway, the cityscape blurring into a smear of lights and shadows. My mind raced, replaying every conversation, every shared glance with Sarah. Was there something I missed? A subtle hint, a veiled remark, a flicker of recognition that I'd been too blind to see. The way she sometimes talked about her childhood, the vague mentions of her mother's struggles, her father's absence, it all seemed so innocent then. Now, it felt like a carefully constructed narrative designed to hide a devastating truth. I pulled over onto the shoulder, the tires crunching on gravel. I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, the cool plastic a small comfort against my burning skin. My father, a man I loved and respected, a man I thought I knew. How could he have done this? How could he have lived with this secret for so long, and then, at the very end, sprung it on me like this? Was it guilt? A final attempt at redemption? Or something else entirely? The thought that he might have intended for me to discover this myself, that he was testing me, even in death, made my stomach churn. And Sarah, my Sarah, the woman who knew all my secrets, who held my heart in her hands, was she complicit? Did she know? The thought of her knowing, of her looking me in the eye every day, sharing our bed, our lives, while harboring this monstrous secret, it was a betrayal so profound, I couldn't even begin to process it.
I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the images, the questions, but they flooded in, relentless and unforgiving. I remember the day we met, the fundraiser, her shy smile, the way she looked at me. Was it genuine? Or was it already tainted by a hidden knowledge, a secret lineage that connected us in a way neither of us could have imagined? My mind reeled with possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Had she been drawn to me because of some subconscious recognition? Some primal instinct of connection that bypassed logic and reason? The thought of her intimacy, our physical relationship, made me feel sick. The years we'd spent together, the love we'd shared, the future we'd planned, it all felt tainted, corrupted. I thought of the vows we'd exchanged, the promises of forever.
Now those promises felt like hollow echoes in the face of this horrifying truth. I spent what felt like hours on the side of the road, wrestling with my demons. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. I knew I couldn't stay out here forever. I had to go back. I had to face Sarah. The drive back to our house was a blur. Every familiar landmark felt like a taunt, a reminder of the life I thought I had. As I pulled into the driveway, the porch light cast a warm glow, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in my gut. I walked up the steps, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door opened before I even reached it. Sarah stood there, silhouetted against the warm light of the living room. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, but there was a resolve in her stance that both frightened and intrigued me. "Robert," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We need to talk." I nodded, unable to speak. I stepped inside, and the air in the house felt heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. We sat on the living room sofa, the same sofa where we'd watched countless movies, where we'd held each other close. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. Finally, I broke the silence. "How much did you know, Sarah?" The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Her eyes widened, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "Robert, I had no idea. I swear to you, I wouldn't lie to you about something like this. This is as shocking to me as it is to you." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. Her honesty seemed genuine, but the doubt lingered, a venomous seed planted deep within me. "But your name? Sarah Elizabeth Miller, my father's daughter. It's too much of a coincidence." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I know. It's a nightmare. My mother, she never spoke of my father. Not ever. She told me he died when I was a baby. She was so young, so scared. She shielded me from everything. I never knew his name. I only found out his name was Robert Hayes a few years ago when I was going through some old boxes of my mother's. I found a letter. It was from him. He was writing to her, trying to reconnect. He mentioned a son. He said he wanted to know me, to be a father to me. But my mother, she never let him. She was so angry, so hurt. A letter? My father writing to her, trying to reconnect? This was a new layer of complexity, a new torment. He had known about her. He had tried to be part of her life. And my mother, did she know about this other woman? About Sarah? The thought of my mother, gone so long, now entangled in this web of secrets, made my head spin. "So you knew my father's name was Robert Hayes?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her gaze steady, though her eyes were brimming with tears. "Yes, I found out a few years ago, when I found the letters. I didn't know what to do. I was so confused. It felt wrong to know that my father was also your father. I didn't want to destroy our lives, Robert. I love you. I didn't want this to come between us." The weight of her words settled upon me. She had known. She had known my father's name, and she had kept it from me. The love I felt for her warred with the raw, stinging pain of betrayal. She had protected me, yes, but she had also deceived me. She had made a choice to keep this secret, a secret that now threatened to unravel everything. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah?" My voice was low, filled with a pain that was almost unbearable. "Why let me find out like this? I was scared, Robert," she cried, her voice cracking. "I was so scared. I thought if I told you, if I brought this into our lives, it would be too much, that you would hate me, that you would see me differently. I never imagined this, that you were my half-brother, that the man I married was my father's son." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding, but I was lost. My emotions were a tangled mess of love, anger, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. The woman I loved
was also my half-sister. The man I admired was a man who had lived a secret life, who had fathered a child with another woman, who had kept this from me for decades. So, who is Eleanor Vance? I asked, the question a desperate attempt to grasp onto some tangible thread in this chaotic narrative. Sarah's face paled further. I don't know. My mother never mentioned a name like that. She said she met him when she was young, that it was a mistake, that he was from a different world. She never gave me details. A different world. My father, a wealthy man, a successful developer. Sarah's mother, a single woman struggling to make ends meet, raising a child alone. The social divide, the class differences, they were all there, unspoken but palpable. This wasn't just a biological connection. It was a story of class, of secrets, of a life lived in the shadows. I stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. My mind flashed back to my father's funeral, to Henderson's dry pronouncements, the life insurance policy, the codicil. He had ensured Sarah was provided for, but why now? Why not before? Was it a final act of atonement, or was he trying to force us together, to bind us in this shared, terrible secret? What about the letters? I demanded, my voice raw. The ones from my father. Did he know about me then? Did he know I was his son? Sarah nodded slowly. Yes. In the later letters he mentioned you. He knew he had a son. He even said he hoped one day you could meet, that he wanted you two to have a relationship. He wrote about you like he was so proud. Proud. My father, proud of me, while simultaneously having a secret daughter, a daughter who would eventually become my wife. The irony was so twisted, so dark, it was almost laughable. Almost. This is insane, Sarah, I whispered, running my hands through my hair. We're brother and sister. We're half-brother and half-sister, she corrected, her voice fragile. It's different. Is it? I countered, the anger rising in my throat. Does it feel different? Because right now, all I feel is sick. All I feel is betrayed. By you. By my father. She flinched, her face crumbling. Robert, please. I love you. I know this is a terrible thing, but it's not our fault. We didn't choose this. But you chose to keep it from me, I said, the words sharp and cruel. You chose to let me walk into this blind. You let me fall in love with you, marry you, build a life with you, knowing this, knowing that you were my blood. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I was trying to protect us. I didn't know what else to do. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved more than life itself, and saw a stranger with my father's eyes, my father's blood. The love I felt for her was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now poisoned, corrupted by the horrifying truth. I couldn't look at her without seeing the impossible connection, the forbidden lineage. I can't do this, Sarah, I said, the words tearing from my throat. I can't look at you and not see that. I can't. Not right now. I turned and walked towards the front door, my legs feeling heavy, disconnected. Robert, wait, she cried out, her voice laced with panic. Where are you going? I didn't answer.
I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, but it offered no relief. I got back into my car, the engine roaring to life, and drove. I drove away from the house, away from Sarah, away from the wreckage of my life. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I couldn't be in the same room with her, knowing what I knew. The confession, the revelation had ripped my world apart, and I was left adrift in the ruins. A man facing a truth so horrific, so twisted, it felt like a nightmare I could never wake up from. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The true devastation, the unraveling of everything, had just begun. The headlights cut through the inky blackness of the highway, each passing mile marker a tiny monument to my unraveling. I kept driving, the radio off, the silence in the car a deafening roar of unanswered questions and raw, gut-wrenching pain. My hands were clenched so tight on the steering wheel, my knuckles were white mountains against the dark leather. Every fiber of my being screamed in protest, in disbelief, in a raw, primal fear that went deeper than anything I'd ever known. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a demolition of my entire reality. The very bedrock of my existence had crumbled, leaving me teetering on the edge of an abyss. Sarah, my Sarah, the woman whose laughter was the soundtrack to my happiest moments, whose touch ignited a fire in me that I thought would never extinguish. The woman who knew the jagged edges of my soul, the insecurities I hid from everyone else. And she knew my father's name. She knew he was my father. And she let me love her, let me marry her, let me build a life, a home, a future, all while this monumental lie festered between us. My mind flashed back to our wedding day, the giddy joy, the tears in her eyes as she said her vows, the way she squeezed my hand. Was any of it real? Or was it all a performance, a masterful deception orchestrated by circumstance and a desperate need for what? Security? A connection she craved? It was impossible to fathom. The depth of the secret, the years she must have lived with it, the constant vigilance required to maintain such a facade. It was terrifying. And my father, the man I revered, the man I'd always looked up to, his every word a lesson, his every action a guide. To think he'd lived this parallel life, this hidden existence, and never once let a sliver of it breach the carefully constructed walls of our family. He had another child, another son or daughter, a half-sibling to me. And that half-sibling was my wife. The sheer, suffocating horror of it was a physical weight in my chest, making each breath a struggle. I thought about Henderson, my father's lawyer, that cryptic meeting, the solemn pronouncements, the mention of a codicil, the life insurance policy specifically naming Sarah. It hadn't felt odd then, just the final administrative gestures of a wealthy man. Now it felt like a perverse testament, a posthumous orchestration of this unspeakable revelation. He had known about Sarah, and he had known about me, and he had, in his own way, ensured we would eventually find out. But why the secrecy? Why the decades of silence? Was it shame? Fear of scandal? Or something more complex? A twisted game of fate he was playing out from beyond the grave? The image of my mother flashed in my mind, her gentle smile, her unwavering devotion. Did she know? Did she suspect? The thought of her being oblivious to such a monumental secret, or worse, being a willing participant in the deception, was almost unbearable. It felt like a desecration of her memory, a stain on the pure love I'd always associated with her. Hours bled into each other on the empty highway. I was a ghost, driving through a world that no longer made sense. The constellations above, once a source of wonder, now felt like cold, indifferent eyes watching my descent into madness. Every mile I put between myself and Sarah felt like a desperate attempt to outrun the truth, an impossible task. The truth was inside me now, a venomous serpent coiled in my gut, its scales scratching against my insides. I pulled into a desolate rest stop, the fluorescent lights buzzing aggressively, painting the deserted parking lot in a harsh, sterile glow. I killed the engine, the silence descending like a shroud. I got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. I walked to the edge of the parking lot, staring out at the dark, unyielding landscape. The vastness of it was both terrifying and strangely comforting. It was a void, a reflection of the emptiness that had consumed me. I thought about the future, our future, the one we'd meticulously planned, the children we'd talked about, the retirement we'd envisioned on some sunny coast. All of it was gone, incinerated by this single devastating truth. How could we ever move past this? How could I ever look at Sarah again without seeing my sister? The word itself was a physical blow. Sister, wife. The two concepts were so diametrically opposed, so fundamentally incompatible, they created a violent cognitive dissonance that threatened to shatter my mind. Was there any way back from this? Any path that didn't lead to utter desolation? The thought of confronting Sarah again, of seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes, was almost too much to bear. But I couldn't run forever. The highway had led me here, to this desolate point, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I had to go back. I had to face the wreckage. The drive back felt different. The highway, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a conveyor belt carrying me back to the scene of the crime.
The familiar glow of our town on the horizon was no longer a beacon of home, but a warning sign. I pulled into our driveway, the headlights illuminating the dark house, the silhouette of the porch swing a cruel reminder of a life that was now irrevocably broken. I walked up the steps, each one a heavy testament to my dread. The front door stood as it had before, a gateway to the life I'd lost. I pushed it open, and the silence inside was even more profound than before. The air was thick with unspoken grief, with the ghosts of laughter and love that now felt like mocking echoes. Sarah was in the living room, curled up on the sofa, the same spot where we'd shared countless intimate moments. She looked smaller, lost, her face etched with a pain that mirrored my own. She looked up as I entered, her eyes, usually so full of warmth, now hollow and shadowed. There were no tears this time, just a profound, weary sadness. "Robert," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold, unable to bridge the chasm that now separated us. "Sarah," I managed, my voice rough and unfamiliar. We sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us like a physical presence. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to mock the stillness, each tick a reminder of the time that had passed, the time that had been wasted, the time that was now irrevocably lost. Finally I spoke, my voice a low, ragged confession. I can't do this, Sarah. I can't unsee it. I can't unlearn it." Her gaze remained fixed on me, a silent plea in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's impossible."
Impossible doesn't even begin to cover it, I said, the words sharp, laced with a pain I couldn't contain. It's a violation of everything, of my parents, of our families, of me, of you. She flinched, her shoulders slumping. "I tried to protect us, Robert. I swear I did. I thought if I kept it buried, if I never let it surface, we could just be. We could just be us." "But there is no us anymore, Sarah," I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Not the us I knew, not the us I loved. How can there be? Every time I look at you, I'll see my father's daughter, and that makes you my sister. The word was a death knell, a final pronouncement. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I love you, Robert. I always will." The words, once a balm, now felt like shards of glass. "And I love you, Sarah," I choked out, the confession tasting like ash in my mouth. "But love isn't enough to erase this. It's not enough to make this right." I walked further into the room, stopping a few feet from her. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd married with the woman who was now my half-sister. Her features, so familiar, so beloved, were now superimposed with the ghost of my father's lineage. It was a monstrous inversion, a perversion of all that I held dear. "My father," I said, my voice low and strained. "He must have known. He must have known about you, and he chose to keep it hidden. He built this life, this perfect family, and kept another child, another life, a secret. And then at the end, he orchestrated this. He handed me this bomb and walked away. He wanted you to know," Sarah said softly. "He wanted you to have a chance to connect. He wrote about that in the letters." "A chance to connect?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "He gave us a chance to discover we're brother and sister, and then what? He expected us to just move on? To pretend this never happened?" The sheer audacity of it, the calculated cruelty, was staggering. I sat down on the armchair opposite her, the distance between us a gaping maw. The comfort of the room, the familiar scent of home, was now laced with a suffocating sense of dread. This was our sanctuary, the place where we'd built our dreams, and now it was the stage for our ultimate undoing. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I admitted, the admission tearing through me. It was a surrender, a confession of my own helplessness. I was adrift, my compass shattered, my map burned. She met my gaze, her own filled with a deep, soul-wrenching sorrow. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice trembling. "Not like this. We can't pretend." "Pretend what?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Pretend we're not this. Pretend this never happened." "No,"
she said, shaking her head. Pretend that we can go back. We can't. But we have to figure out what comes next. The question hung in the air, a stark reminder of the new reality we were thrust into. What did come next? There was no blueprint for this, no well-trodden path to guide us. We were explorers in a land of unimaginable devastation, with no compass and no map. I thought of my father's final act, his carefully placed dominoes. He had set this in motion, and now we were left to deal with the fallout. Was this his twisted penance, his final earth-shattering lesson? I need to leave, Sarah, I said, the words heavy with a finality that I both craved and dreaded. I need space. I can't be here. Not now. Not like this. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I understand. The understanding in her voice was a cold comfort, a quiet acknowledgement of the unbridgeable chasm. I stood up, my legs shaky. I walked to the front door, my gaze sweeping over the familiar photographs on the wall, the shared memories frozen in time. They were ghosts now, haunting reminders of a life that was no more. I opened the door, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the house. "Robert," she said, her voice a faint whisper, just as I was about to step out. I turned, my heart aching with a grief so profound and felt physical. What about the will?" she asked, her voice fragile. "The money, your father's legacy." I looked at her, a bitter smile playing on my lips. What good is money when it's built on a foundation of lies? When it's the price of a secret that has destroyed us? I shook my head. I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't know. Right now, that feels like the least of our problems. I stepped out into the darkness, closing the door softly behind me. The click of the latch was the final punctuation mark on the life we had built. I got into my car, the engine a familiar, yet now alien, sound. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. The city lights blurred past, a smear of color against the overwhelming blackness. I was a man adrift, stripped bare, left with nothing but the raw, unbearable truth. The devastation was complete, and in the echoing silence of my shattered life, there was only the hollow space where love and trust used to reside. This was not an ending, but a horrifying beginning, a descent into a new, uncharted territory of pain and loss. I took a deep, ragged breath, the air filling my lungs with the taste of ash and despair.